They made, like, Z9 may be doing damage, but they're not actually killing anyone.
No,
So
besides Zero.
there's already a nano boost, and Monkey's already in. He is angry, and Swaggy has been instantly wiped.
Where to even begin with this one? Chengdu without a doubt had the biggest redemption story of Advanced, but it was a different kind of redemption than what you see with the bot burgers and Novice. The Chads required a complete overhaul of most of their roster and management to make it work, and while it certainly was a bumpy ride getting there, once they finally did, it was something to behold. Let's take a ride through Season 1 and learn a little bit more about the absolute cluster truck that was the Chengdu Chads. If you were around for the league's Season 0, you wouldn't be amiss for mistaking Chengdu Chads as a revival of Z9 in some ways. Both the manager, Genie, and their captain, Ducky, were players on the original Z9 roster, and were extremely active, effectively assistant managing that team alongside Juice. They were absolutely crucial to the team's late season success, making them a power duo for this brand new team entering Season 1. It was painfully obvious who the Chads were going for during the draft. They did barely any scouting at all. They were looking for their friends mostly, most of which had played together on a few experimental open division teams in between League 0 seasons. To nobody's surprise, the management was joined by Zira, Melon, North, Adam, Chegg, Calbo, and Bubbles, making this the smallest roster in all of Advanced. The starting lineup was mainly North on main tank, Ducky on off tank, Melon and Zira on DPS, Adam on main support, and Genie on flex support. Dubbed the Squeaker Squad for their incredibly young age, the Chads quickly became both a source of entertainment and fear for the menagerie of personalities they had gathered. Their starting DPS duo in particular was something else, as Melon and Zira were two of the youngest and most explosively talented individuals in the community. The question on everyone's mind was not if this team could perform, it was if the management could keep the team together.
Going into the first week of the regular season, the predictions were all over the place on who would win the Chads versus Newt Newt match. Both teams had plenty of Season 0 veterans, and it seemed it would come down to which teams were better prepared. Chengdu scrimmed almost every single day leading up to the match, and as we already know from the Newt Newt episode, they didn't scrim at all, meaning that the immense amount of preparation Chengdu did leading up to the game was more than enough. They took down the Newts in a somewhat close 3-1, and looked like they were ready to continue this upward momentum throughout the season. Unfortunately, it wouldn't take long for the cracks and weaknesses to appear. Almost immediately after Week 1, rumors were spreading that both Melon and Zero were interested in joining other teams. One particular rumor that circulated was that Zero was going to another team to switch from Brig to his obvious comfort pick, Zarya. Wait, what? There had been a fair amount of internal conflict in many of the OD teams previously mentioned, and perhaps bringing back almost the same exact roster with nothing to address the issues those teams had wasn't the best idea. But for now, the team was still trekking forward, as the signing window wouldn't open up until Week 3. Moving into Week 2, EasyGlap was looking like a tough opponent pre-collapse, and sure enough, they brought the fight to Chengdu. EasyGlap took an early lead in the series, which drained the Chads' morale. They did make a valiant effort to come back and almost succeeded, but ultimately Chengdu would fall to the collab 3-1. And this is where things started to take a turn for the worse.
Chengdu faced Crest the following week, and North was unavailable, so they had to enlist the help of Tedison as a main tank ringer. Take a team with already struggling internal issues, paired with the fact that they were forced to use a ringer considerably lower ranked than the rest of the team, and pile on top of the fact that it was Crest. Yeah, it went about as well as you'd expect. Kudos to them for trying and not forfeiting, but in the end, not showing up would have yielded the exact same map differential. Eventually, Melon would leave the team, forcing them down to the bare minimum 8 players. Chengdu was now without a hitscan DPS, and 2 flex DPS that couldn't play Zarya. They tried running Zera on Zarya for a little while, but don't do that. It's a bad idea. The team managed to make their Week 4 match against HCB to go to a map 5, but they would ultimately lose out. The one caveat to Week 4's crushing defeat is that they were now with a backup main tank. Big Boy McMatt was transferred over from Crest, and at the very least they didn't have to rely on ringers as North was still unavailable. We'll discuss this more in a bit, but picking up Matt would later prove to be one of the most consequential choices on the road to Chengdu's turnaround. The Chads would close out the first half of the season with a 1-4 record, placing them dead last in the Advanced Division and on equal footing with Platchat in the Novice Division. Tensions inside the team weren't necessarily running high as much as there was an awkward lack of communication, leading to an indifference all around. Ducky and Matt had been concocting plans to turn it all around with a few key pickups they'd been scouting, but in the meantime they had to deal with multiple members asking to be traded away or to be treated as subs rather than starters. Chengdu would have a mountain to climb if they wanted to turn their season around in the following 5 weeks. This is by far the most tumultuous time of the season for Chengdu, as they ended up going through sweeping changes that would permanently shift their focus. They were looking to become hyper-competitive and to become a championship-worthy team by the time playoffs rolled around. Unfortunately, that would require a shift in management to break through to their full potential. By this point, Genie was becoming less responsive, particularly towards Matt and Ducky, who were trying to strategize big moves to change up the roster. This, of course, caused frustration to build inside the team, which came to a head when Genie stepped down as manager, to which Ducky stepped up to replace him, with Matt taking on the role as the new captain. And with that, the team was primed to overhaul everything. To replace the long vacant hit scan role, the new management scouted a young prospect called Korean Wannabe, or Wannabe for short, as well as an off-tank known as Marky Candy, though there would be some drama surrounding that pickup in particular, as Marky was found to be throwing competitive games down to low bronze, despite being a top 500 player normally. This resulted in him being suspended for a number of weeks. However, Ducky and Bubbles were still available to fill in that role as they were needed, so the team could survive a couple of weeks without their intended starter. From the outside, it had appeared as though Chengdu made a ton of roster moves during the break, but no one was sure if they'd be able to gel as well as the other top teams that didn't need to change things up so drastically. But those doubts were quickly laid to rest as Week 6 games rolled around. If it wasn't already painfully obvious, the Chads really needed a hit scan specialist like Wannabe. Their quality of Zarya play in GOATs, as well as now being flexible enough to swap onto something like Hackfist for specific points, was invaluable to their success, leading them to their first ever 4-0 victory. Leading into Week 7, Chengdu brought about their final and arguably one of their most important changes to the starting lineup. When Newt imploded, they managed to convince Basilisk to join the team, giving them one of the top main supports in the entire league. This obviously increased their backline strength, but Baz also brought with him top-tier shot calling as well. Chengdu would get their revenge on Easy Clap, though probably not in the way they had intended. Their opponents had to forfeit due to exploding for the third time this season, which gave them another 4-0 victory by default. The real challenge was just on the horizon, however, as the remaining 3 weeks were filled with tough games all around. Up until this point in the season, Crest had only lost once, and that was to a fully powered Z9 boasting Reality's Sombra's GOATs. So needless to say, Chengdu would have to pull off the upset of a lifetime here. North was unavailable yet again, leaving Matt to fill in on main tank. However, they knew that going into the match, so they had time to prepare. They practiced strategies and reviewed a few Crest VODs they had, knowing full well that their opponents were top tier, though their efforts would fall just short, as they managed to take a map early on, but not much more would be yielded. They played well, but they would need to come together more if they wanted to claim the pinnacle of advance for themselves. And yet more hurdles were still to come. Hangzhou had been climbing up the rankings just like Chengdu, though most predicted that the Chads would pull ahead given their recent changes to the lineup. Once again, they would take Bark to a map 5, only to lose it in the very end. It sucked that they weren't able to field their full roster yet, suffering 2 losses to tough opponents as a result, but thanks to the new wave of leadership, the team wasn't even close to falling apart yet. Week 10 rolls around and Z9 was struggling quite a bit. Gagbag wasn't able to make this match, and Marky Candy was finally able to play after his suspension was lifted. The best word to describe Chengdu at this juncture would be scary. This was their intended starting roster, and they were capable of defeating the likes of Yusuf and Swaggy Turtle leading Z9. An impressive feat to say the least, and the Chads were looking incredibly promising going into the playoffs. While they didn't quite manage to climb past 4th place in the regular season standings, it would have taken the upset of a century to see Newt travel to the semifinals instead of them. Sure enough, the quarterfinals were a simple task for Chengdu to clear out, leaving them with the potential to face either Z9 in a rematch of Week 10 or Crest, one of the hurdles they never quite managed to cross over. Possibly to their fortune, Crest chose to face Hangzhou Bark in the semis, meaning that Chengdu would have to face Z9 yet again, except now without their former main tank and main support. Gagbag was present now, but it was brought into severe questioning whether he alone could carry them to the grand finals. The game that ensued was awkward, to say the least. Z9 couldn't manage to get their new main support to show up, forcing them to play Peter and Adbon on the role. They gave it a valiant effort, but there was simply no stopping the Chads by then. They continued to roll on through to the grand finals, creating one of the most hyped matchups for what would turn out to be one of the least hyped games in the entire season. Going into the playoffs as a whole, Chengdu was scrimming quite a bit. They had a set-in-stone roster and plans in place. It was only a matter of perfecting those strategies and not allowing Crest to dictate the pace of the fight. However, in the week leading up to the finals, lack of scrims and nerves started to hit the team. They were certain they could take on Crest and come out victorious, but they never played with the confidence to back it up. Crest decided to pull out a niche triple DPS strategy that Chengdu never quite came up with an answer for. They played scared, which is something you can never do when playing goats into bunker. Most of all, the Chads played themselves. Their uncertainty and self-doubt got the better of them, and that resulted in a quick 4-0 loss to the new Advanced Division champs. In the staff press conference, I stated that my favorite advanced team would have to be Chengdu because they proved me the wrong the most, in a good way. When it hit mid-season, they were legitimately looking like the advanced version of Platchat, and that's not a comparison you want to be made about your team. They looked utterly hopeless with no direction, just floundering around waiting for something to happen. The managerial changes mid-season were absolutely vital to the team's success this season, and despite the disappointing end at the hands of the unstoppable Crest, I'm proud of what they accomplished. They fell short of the gold, but to be entirely honest, I don't think any teams besides maybe Hangzhou would have done better. Of course, the Bark lost to Crest in the semis, so perhaps I'm just being redundant here. Needless to say that I'm impressed with where the team was at the end, and I hope to see at least some of them make a return to either playing or managing in future seasons. There's a disgusting amount of potential in the Chads, and it'd be a shame to see it disappear entirely. Now for the grade. This is a tough one, because there's really two generations of this team throughout Season 1. Weeks 1 through 5, and then the remainder of the season when Ducky and Matt took over. If I had to rate them separately, I'd give the first half a flat F. There's no way around it, the team was pathetic at best back then. But then they really turned it around in the best way possible later on, and I'd have to give their more recent efforts an A-. Of course, Chengdu didn't truly dissolve like Easy Clap or Newt Newt did. There actually was a smooth transition of power in Advanced for once, and if I were to look at the team season holistically, I'd give it a B-. They went through some serious trials and, for better or worse, survived them, and maybe even took something to heart in the process. I genuinely hope that those that took part in the team never forget what they did this season, because we're certainly never going to let them forget their rollout theme.
Pulling up with the beams, it's the Chengdu Chads. Rolling through your teams, it's the Chengdu Chads. You're gonna get the smoke from the Chengdu Chads. Whole team bout to choke against the Chengdu Chads. 2 to the 1, 1 to the 1, 1 to the 3. Chengdu Chads finna smoke your whole team. Fear the mad lads with the Chengdu Chads. They're gonna roll and smoke ya. Call them XQC. To them, you're a Shanghai Season 1 4-0 baby. Your team is fucking done, cause this is how Chengdu is goddamn run. The team fighting to be Zero's #1. Pulling up with the beams, it's the Chengdu Chads. Rolling through your teams, it's the Chengdu Chads. You're gonna get the smoke from the Chengdu Chads. Whole team bout to choke against the Chengdu Chads. Pulling up with the beams, it's the Chengdu Chads. Rolling through your teams, it's the Chengdu Chads. You're gonna get the smoke from the Chengdu Chads. Whole team bout to choke against the Chengdu Chads, eh?